Believe it or not, there was a time when Sally Acorn was possibly just as or even more popular than Sonic himself. Back when the comic was in its infancy and when the Saturday morning cartoon was still running, both in its initial run and the reruns, Sally was one of the linchpins for the series. Nowadays, the great majority of the Sonic fanbase that didn't grow up with the cartoon or doesn't read the comics probably doesn't know much about her. But back in the 90s, even Sega themselves seemed to have big plans for the character. Plans that obviously fell through at some point or another, but she was very much the darling of the American branch of the franchise. So it was no real surprise that she ended up getting her own 3-issue miniseries in an attempt to flesh her out and add to the mythos a little bit, and I can't really keep that up. The miniseries was a massive disappointment from the word go, and I can't help but look back on it with a certain level of cringe. But maybe my opinion is just colored by poor judgment when I was a little kid. Let's give it a fresh look. The cover of issue 1 is very nice. It paints a very vivid picture, with nice-looking characters, great colors, and a rather epic feel, though the logo for the Sally miniseries doesn't really strike me as particularly interesting. The design of it reminds me a lot of the Sailor Moon logo, actually. But yeah, the cover's good, so let's move on. The comic makes the weirdly bizarre choice to give us a full page of text giving us the background for the main comic book to date, setting up the original premise, because I guess Archie was just concerned that kids might pick this thing up, not knowing that it was linked to another comic, but the big Sonic in the corner box on the cover might be a big indication of that. After the exposition dump, we get even more exposition dump, as the comic picks up right where the prologue for Deadliest of the Species left off, after a quick recap. Sally and St. John are pinned down by SWAT bots, and we see that we are in Deadliest of the Species Part 1. We also see that our storytellers today are Mike, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your last name, Kenterovich, and Ken Penders. So this story has about a 50-50 shot at being interesting. Or good, really. Sally and Jeffrey share some banter while under fire, Sally demonstrating why you shouldn't mess with a princess when she lobs a freaking grenade into the crowd. The two of them make good their escape while Sally states that they're going to meet up with her unit, and we're introduced to said unit right away, made up of Hamlin the pig, Arlo the armadillo, Dylan the porcupine, and Penelope the platypus. Enjoy seeing them in the mini folks because you won't be seeing them much after this. The group is getting antsy since Sally's taking a long time, half of them worried, the other half confident in Sally's abilities. But this does cast her actions in the backup story leading up to this in a bit of a bad light because, as we see here, she brought backup, but she never really utilized it. Hamlin hears something in the bushes, and next thing he knows he's on the ground with Jeffrey standing over him. Why did Jeffrey attack unprovoked? Why didn't Sally explain to him who her unit was ahead of time? Why didn't she lead him to the camp herself instead of jumping out of the foliage a little later after the mysterious stranger she just met during a dangerous mission has already assaulted one of her teammates? All of these questions, and more, will not be answered. Obviously, Hamlin is less than supportive of having a newcomer around, especially after the attack on his person, a theme that will continue throughout the miniseries. And this is as good a time as any to point out that, out of all of the new characters who are introduced in this story, the only ones who actually get something akin to characterization are Jeffrey and Hamlin. And Hamlin's character doesn't really go beyond being suspicious of Jeffrey. Arlo, Dylan, and Penelope, completely useless. The closest thing they get to having actual character is the fact that they have names. I'm not exaggerating when I say all three of them could have been completely cut from this story and not a damn thing would change. There was no reason for them to be here. If you really wanted new characters, you could have just introduced one. One would have been enough and might have been much more manageable than 5 new characters in a single story, where only 2 of them actually do anything, and one of them only does something by technicality. Okay, I'll save the rest of my problems with this group for later. Let's move on with the story. After a good night's sleep, Sally tells us of the plan, that they want to take out the 4 power generator facilities around Robotropolis to cripple its ground defenses and make it more vulnerable to attacks. The facility Sally destroyed yesterday was one such facility, and our intrepid adventurers set off for the second one, where only Sally does anything on the outside, throwing a grenade in to break down the defenses before they walk inside. Sally, and once again only Sally, sets to work hacking the terminal, going a more subtle route and uploading some sort of virus into the system. They're getting ready to hightail it when suddenly, bam, big-ass security bots. Big-ass, incredibly goofy security bots. Who knew evil could look so cute? They scatter and Sally pulls a Hoff by tripping one of the bots, sending it tumbling down. Toward Hamlin, no less. And nothing of value was lost. Actually, no, Jeffrey swoops in and saves this utterly useless character before he can be crushed under a big pile of scrap. Thanks a lot for that, skunk boy. I'm sure he will prove very useful later. Blech. The team dashes out of the facility, the remaining security bot in hot pursuit, but apparently it has worse traction than Luigi because as soon as they lure it to a cliff face, the thing pretty much throws itself over the edge. And after that, Hamlin decides to pick another fight with Jeffrey, because as we all know, there's never a better time to start fighting with a member of your teammate than right after a near-death experience, right? Sally forces them apart, reminding Hamlin that Jeffrey saved his life, and that if he doesn't trust him at this point, then he might as well not trust her either. We cut to later that night, with Jeffrey sneaking off while everyone else sleeps, going through some weird portal device, and coming out next to a facility that has Sally asleep in a pod. I'll be honest, the cliffhanger at the end hasn't aged well with time, and I'm generally very critical of body swap, clone, or duplicate stories at the best of times, but when it's accompanying such a frustrating and bare-bones story, whoop boy, this first issue doesn't give the best sort of impression. But at the very least, the cliffhanger does give me a reason to be curious enough to come back for the next issue, because nothing else is going to do it. There was very little that actually happened in this issue. There was quite a bit of action here, but it came at the expense of actually getting me to care about anything that was going on, especially since the only character that we really have any idea about here is Sally herself. Jeffrey doesn't make much of an impression after his semi-interesting introduction, but the other freedom fighters make even less of an impression. As I've already pointed out, the only character in the group that actually does anything is Hamlin, and he's basically only there to be the resident asshole and cast doubt on Jeffrey's intentions, something that the ending does just fine on its own. The other three, I've already forgotten their names because they did nothing. As a side note, the fact that Sally refers to them as the next generation of freedom fighters rubs me the wrong way. I can't think of a single time in comics when I saw the phrase next generation of something, and it actually lived up to what that title entails. And that's reflected by the fact that the characters don't show up again until several dozen issues down the line, when they're suddenly reintroduced as meddling bureaucrats holding a grudge against Sally and the actual freedom fighters. But that discussion will have to wait until that particular point when I get to it sometime in 2067 or something. For now, let's move on to the second issue of the Sally miniseries and pray that things get a little bit better. Spoiler alert, they don't. I'll see you all there.